Welcome to the Congressional Debates, a presentation of WVIA Public Media. Tonight, candidates from Pennsylvania's 10th Congressional District. Live from the Sordoni Theater at WVIA Studios, our moderator, WVIA FM's Larry Voitko.
Good evening, I'm Larry Voitko, and welcome to the first in a series of debates among the candidates for the U.S. House of Representatives. Tonight, we hear from the candidates in the 10th District. We have a live audience here at the Sordoni Theater of the WVIA Public Media Studios, and they have been instructed to applaud only when you just heard them at the beginning of and at the conclusion of the debate. Well, the 10th District encompasses a large geography from the Poconos through the northern tier down along the west branch of the Susquehanna, almost to Harrisburg. Currently, the district is represented by Congressman Tom Marino. This year, he faces Democrat Mike Molesevich. Congressman Tom Marino is seeking his fourth term in the House. He was first elected in 2010. He was born and raised in Lycoming County and began his working life just out of high school in a manufacturing facility. Eventually, Mr. Marino went to college and finished his education with a law degree from the Dickinson School of Law. His political career began as district attorney of Lycoming County. He served as a U.S. attorney before his election to Congress. Mr. Marino and his wife Edie have two children, Chloe and Victor, and they reside in Cogan Station just outside of Williamsport. Mike Molesevich, the Democrat, was born and raised in Mount Carmel, PA. He grew up in a large family with 6 brothers and sisters. Mike attended Juniata College, where he majored in environmental science, and occasionally returns to his alma mater as a guest lecturer. He furthered his education at Bucknell University, eventually moving to Lewisburg, where he later started his own business. He entered public service as a borough councilman and then served as mayor between 1994 and 1998, and then he returned to the Lewisburg Council for another 4-year term. WVIA welcomes these candidates as they field questions from our panelists. Laura Lee Jansen is news editor of the Williamsport Sun-Gazette, where she has moved up the ranks during a 32-year career in journalism. Prior to becoming a journalist, she spent 4 years in the Air Force working in flight simulation. Dr. Atia Kai Stokes-Brown, Interim Associate Provost for Diversity and Associate Professor of Political Science, Bucknell University. A Pennsylvania native with more than 15 scholarly publications, Dr. Stokes-Brown currently resides in the Lewisburg area with her husband and 4 children. Jennifer Wakeman is news director of WKOK and the 4 other radio stations of Sunbury Broadcasting Corporation, and also has a background in television news. Ms. Wakeman has lived in the Susquehanna Valley for more than 20 years. Now, here is the format for this hour-long debate agreed to by both campaigns. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement. Responses to the questions by our panelists will be held to 90 seconds. However, at the discretion of the moderator, 30 additional seconds may be allotted to each candidate for rebuttal. All times will be strictly enforced. All the questions are devised by the individual panelists, each of whom submitted a series of questions to WVIA for review prior to tonight's debate. We move now to the opening statements. Now, earlier this evening, a coin toss determined who would go first, and so Congressman Tom Marino will begin with the opening statement. Mr. Marino.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. Thank those of you at home for watching. I come from a blue-collar family. I worked 13 years in a factory. Most of it was a bakery and a little bit of steel. I know what it's like to sweat, get dirt under my fingernails, stretch a paycheck from this week to next week, and also stretch a dollar because of coming from that blue-collar family. I started college 2 weeks after my 30th birthday. My wife and I decided that that's what we needed to do. And my wife, beautiful Edie, sitting here with us tonight, she worked full-time and I worked part-time. And we got through college and law school in 5 years. It normally takes 7, but that's all we could afford. I was a partner in a law firm. I did a little corporate law, but most of my career is in prosecution. I was an 18-year prosecutor, a district attorney, and a U.S. attorney, putting the criminals away. I will be married for 43 years on Thursday. I have to get that right. I have two beautiful children that we adopted, and you know my background. I'm pro-Second Amendment. I'm pro-life. As I said, my children are adopted. I'm a term limit guy. 12 years, and you got to get out. It's not supposed to be a career. We need to take better care of our seniors and our veterans, as my constituent service has done for the last 6 years. I'm a states' rights guy. The less federal government in our lives, the better. We see where we've gone in the last 30 years with career politicians being president. We need to secure the borders, and we need a strong, well-paid military. And I've also got an unprecedented amount of legislation signed into law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Now our opening statement from his challenger, Democrat Mike Molesevich.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for the great pronunciation of my last name. The best way that I can thank you all for this debate is to ask you, the listeners, to support this station and the other stations that are sponsoring and hosting this debate. This debate will be about a contrast between two candidates. I will lead us into a highly competitive and global economy, a rapidly changing world, and climate. Our 6-year incumbent, I don't think will. Here's how. Number one, campaign finance reform. We cannot solve any problems in Washington or develop any fair legislation or policy until we remove the influence of special interest in Congress. Our issues are more important than fundraising. We should spend more time solving problems, developing policy and legislation, and less time calling for money for the next congressional campaign. We must legislate in the public interest and not in the special interest. We need more and better jobs, and the way we do that is with targeted stimulus programs, infrastructure, renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and timber resources that made Pennsylvania, and tourism. We must promote new businesses, small businesses, startups, and entrepreneurs. We need creative ways to bring the youth, the long-term unemployed, to our workforce. And finally, we need moderation and cooperation in Washington. Whether in Washington, our communities, or in Harrisburg, we need to work together and support each other. There is more that unites us than that divides us, and when we are united, we are strong. I can do better, and you deserve better.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Molesevich. We move now on to the question part of our debate tonight. And our first question will be delivered by Laura Jensen from the Williamsport Sun-Gazette. And Mr. Molesevich will have the option of answering that question first.
Good evening. A Gallup poll this year showed that just 48% of Americans expect they will have enough money in retirement. What will you do to fix Social Security and ensure its survival for millions of working Americans?
The first thing we need to do is protect Social Security and not privatize it. I like to think that when FDR established Social Security, we need to keep the security in Social Security. We need always, in whatever programs the federal government oversees, is cut waste and fraud and inefficiency and hold those accountable who do not. We need to remove the income limit on Social Security so that those who can afford to pay more will and should pay more. Thank you.
And Mr. Marino, now you have 90 seconds to respond.
The most effective way to shore up Social Security is, first of all, the federal government keep its hands out of it. But you know how we do this? We create jobs. And you know how we create jobs? We lower the corporate tax to bring business back into the industry, back into the United States. We renegotiate the lopsided trade deals that we always come out on the short end of the stick on. We make sure that, as I chair the Regulatory Reform Committee on Judiciary, which is deregulation, the EPA, OSHA, these agencies that are run by unelected officials keep creating thousands and thousands of pieces of pages of overreaching, job-crushing regulations that start on the corner store with a mom and pop family, with our farmers, with our mid-sized business. Look what it's done to us as far as Obamacare. It's going up 25% next year. The government is too big. So if we have more people working and paying into Social Security with good paying jobs, we can revive the coal industry that this administration attempts, and as Hillary Clinton attempts to put out of business. We can revive the steel industry. We have the oil and the gas right in our region here that we can become energy independent. We don't need bigger government. Washington, D.C.'s answer to everything is raising taxes, taking more from hardworking taxpayers. This is how we'll secure Social Security.
Mr. Marino. Thank you. Now, our next question will be answered first by Mr. Marino, and it comes from Atia Stokes-Brown.
Thank you. Representative Marino, you have voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Can you outline a specific plan that would serve as a suitable replacement that will allow the maintenance of the current benefits, including individuals not being denied coverage for pre-existing conditions?
Sure. First of all, when Obamacare came into play here, it was supposed to cover 60 million people for $900 billion and some change, and we were supposed to be able to pick our doctors, our hospitals, and it wouldn't cost us a penny. It has skyrocketed. I have more and more people coming into my office crying. I had a woman come in the other day with tears in her eyes saying, my husband has dementia. My rates are going up because I'm on Obamacare. It's going up 25% next year, and people can't afford it the way it is. Here's what we do. We take one of the two pieces of legislation that the Republicans have put together where the federal government gets out of the way and works closely with the states, the insurance companies, and let us change and decide who we want to run our insurance, our health insurance. We should be able to cross state lines where we can get health care coverage, because when you can cross state lines, there's competition. And when there's competition, the prices should come down. And the prices will come down if we get the federal government out of trying to make sure that one size fits all. It doesn't. Right now, out of the president's office, Obamacare will only cover 22 million people at a cost of between $1.8 and $2.4 trillion. The American people cannot afford this.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Mr. Molesevich.
I am not under the Affordable Care Act, and my rates are still going up. It's called the private sector. Doesn't always work that way, Tom. Also, wasting time, money, and effort in Congress in trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act 60 times is not an efficient use of time, money, and resources. If we're going to have an alternative to the Affordable Care Act, then we need to hear something that's going to work, be effective, and plausible. Any new product that comes out in the market, whether it's a new car, a new smartphone, Galaxy phone, Samsung, anything has its problems and issues, and it needs to be worked out. Are there problems with it? Sure. But do we get rid of all of the benefits, such as children up to 26 years old that can still stay on their parents' medical plan? That's pretty nice. Existing conditions, that's pretty nice. Keeping people from using the emergency room as their family doctor, that's pretty nice. There's a lot of benefits. And right now, according to Bloomberg Business News, came out just yesterday, we have the most insured people in America than ever before. That's a good thing also.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Sure. 30
I have
seconds.
to be on Obamacare. I know what it's like, but fortunately I can afford it. And there are people, as I said, that cannot afford this. And it's not working. The president has told us in the House that not only does it not need replaced, he's saying it doesn't need fixed. There's nothing wrong with it. Bill Clinton just came out and said it's crazy. The Democrats are coming out and saying it is not affordable, it is not working, and this president and his minions led us down a path. Remember, it was a Democrat White House, House, and Senate
Thank you,
that
Mr.
shot
Marino.
that by us.
Would you like to?
And it was also not much different than the Romney plan in Massachusetts. That's all I have to say.
All right, let's move on. And Jennifer Wakeman of Sunbury Broadcasting will ask the next question, and it's directed first to Mr. Molesevich.
Economic development and job growth is a key issue for voters, particularly in the 10th District. What can be done to create jobs in the district? And in your view, is job creation the role of the federal government?
It's a combination. And yes, it is a role. Because we have to compete in a global economy, and there are other countries who basically use their power as government in order to promote their governments and their industries. And so we basically need to work together. That's what moderation and cooperation is. We need to work together. Well, first of all, we need to look at where we were and where we are now. In 2008, terrible financial crisis and market recession. Unemployment was 10% or more. Now it's down to 5%. GDP is at steady, could be higher, and this last quarter was good. So we have the signs, and we need to continue with what we're doing, but we need to do more. We need to create a stimulus in order to engage the middle-class working families so that they have more disposable income to create purchases, create demand for goods and services, so that people who are investors and have large sums of money sitting idle can now have a reason to invest in manufacturing. There's no demand for goods and services. That's why reducing taxes for the top richest 1% will not work. There's no place for them to invest in the manufacturing. That's why we need to reduce taxes on the middle working families so that they have more disposable income to create demand for goods and services.
Thank you, Mr. Molesevich. Mr. Marino.
You know, that's a figure for unemployment that my opponent quoted. It's a lie coming out of this administration. It doesn't take into consideration the several million people that stopped looking for work. It doesn't take into consideration that this administration counts as full-time work, people working 30 hours or 25 hours or working 2 or 3 part-time jobs. The government, the federal government, does not create jobs, it spends money. And you know what, as he uses the word stimulus, how did that go with Obama spending $1 trillion on stimulus on shovel-ready jobs? There weren't any shovel-ready jobs. That money was wasted, $1 trillion gone. What we need to do is cut the regulations that are just crushing the jobs in this country. The government, the unelected bureaucrats that work in these agencies and departments have no clue what our middle class is going through. They have no clue that they haven't had a raise in 14 years. They have no clue what the regulations do that this administration and others, the Republican administrations too. Look, I don't blame only the Democrats. I blame the Republicans had opportunities too. That's why I decided to run for Congress and work for my constituents, work for the middle class. The government, again, does not create jobs. It creates regulations that prevent jobs. We need the government to get out of the way and let private industry do what it does best, creates good jobs with good incomes.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Yes, 30 seconds.
Think about who can better serve the working people in the 10th District. I established my own business after I was laid off. I didn't blame a class of people. I didn't even blame my employer. I started a new job. Who can lead better? Someone who was appointed to various positions or someone who created a job and a business and was able to successfully keep that going for 30 years. I know it better. I can do it better.
Thank you. Well, we move on to our next question here
Can I have a response to that appointed? He must be referring to when I was appointed U.S. attorney and when I was a district attorney. I put the criminals away, I put the rapists, the murderers, organized crime, the drug dealers away. And you know something, in industry, I worked my way up in those 13 years managing people. I personally know what it's like to supervise people from originally starting from 12 to 1,000. And I know what it takes to build industry, to build private jobs, because I was responsible for doing that and creating jobs and making a product. And you know something?
Thank you,
wife
Mr.
and I
Marino.
put me through
Thank
school.
you. I just want to
without
point out that we
taking
have
any money.
to keep this moving along, and we need to move on to the next question from Dr. Stokes-Brown from Bucknell University, and her question will be first addressed to Mr. Marino.
Thank you. So currently, congressional and executive actions to address the issues of immigration have stalled. How might you, as a member of Congress, work to advance immigration reform?
Secure the borders. We have no idea who is coming into this country. The terrorists are coming into this country, and yes, I'm not afraid to say it. I'm sure that we have an Islamic extremist terrorist in this country. We need to allow Homeland Security, and particularly ICE. I've worked with these guys for 18 years. They cannot detain anybody. We're not sending people back. We don't have enough people on the borders. Even the FBI director said, we have no idea who's coming into this country. So let's start enforcing the rules that are on the books. Let's start not letting people come into this country in droves crossing the line. And this administration even supports sanctuary cities. It says, the city said, you illegals, come here and live. We won't arrest you, and we won't let anybody else come in and arrest you. This administration supports this. I'm second generation Italian American. My grandparents came to this country legally. So if we follow the process, I have people from all walks of life. I go to the courthouse a couple of times a year when people are sworn in from all over the world. And they did it the legal way. So if we let the ICE agents do what they're supposed to be doing, if we can check to see who's coming into this country, we have no idea of how to check Syrians when they come in this country. There's no paperwork.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Molesevich.
In 2013, there was legislation that was introduced and passed in the Senate. It was called the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act. It passed the U.S. Senate with bipartisan support. This legislation would have created a path to citizenship for the people who are here. It would have established 40,000 Border Patrol agents, and it would have created a point system for people wanting to get citizenship based on their skill, their education, and their training. Bipartisan, and it went to the House of Representatives, where it met Mr. Gridlock, Mr. Obstructionist, in the House, and it just got stalled. We had working relationships. We had bipartisan support on this legislation. It was a better way. It was reasonable, and so we would not have needed an expensive wall, a controversial wall. We would not have had to have deported millions of Muslim people, as has been indicated by the Republican presidential candidate. So we didn't need a ban. And really, when you study this issue, the real problem is political exiles and people running from drug cartels in Central America, going through Mexico and then into the U.S. And so we need to work with our southern partners.
Thank you, Mr. Molesevich.
Cooperatively.
I'd like to respond to that.
I'm not surprised.
Ask Kate Steinley's family, who had an illegal immigrant come into this country not one time, two times, three times, but 5 times, and shot her right in front of her father. What my opponent is talking about, obviously, he doesn't read the legislation. I do. You know what that was? That was Nancy Pelosi's legislation that was nothing but total amnesty. And I took her on the floor that day, and the security had to take her off because she came over chasing me.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Let's move on. We have next question is from Jennifer Wakeman from Sunbury Broadcasting, and it will be addressed first to Mr. Molesevich.
The 10th District is primarily rural. There are an abundance of small family farms. Agricultural input costs continue to rise while milk prices remain historically low. The U.S. wants inexpensive food. How would you support small farmers in Pennsylvania?
First of all, we need to be familiar with the district. You need to spend time in the district. We need to listen to the farmers and be a voice in Washington for rural Pennsylvania, and that has been lacking. I like to think I know the district well. I've worked in the district, traveled the district, and we need to put our focus on smaller farms that are more representative in rural Pennsylvania so that they can afford the margin crop insurance, so that they have better access to markets. And in talking to some of the dairy farmers in Bradford, Susquehanna County, I've learned that some of the pressure is coming from the milk producers and not so much from the other sources that one would think. And so they're required for more inspections, more regulations from the big milk corporations. Those are the ones that you see the big tanker trucks going. So they're putting a lot more pressure on them too. We need also to make sure that we have small family farms being transferred to younger generations. Generational farming and family transition so that we can keep these farms going. Just recently I attended a Chamber of Commerce meeting where the topic was using a family from Snyder County as an example so that I could now learn and share that with other counties in this district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molesevich. Mr. Marino.
Well, first of all, we in the House have made sure that farms can pass to the children of farmers because we passed legislation that significantly decreases what farms have to pay in insurance when an owner dies. So we've done that. And don't talk to me about being all over the district. When I'm not in DC, I'm all over the 15 counties. I live in the middle of 5 farms. I'm always on farms. I'm watching them milk. I'm watching pig farms. I'm over at chicken farms. And you know something? I just got, for the 6th year in a row, from the agricultural and the farmers, one of the best legislators award that can be given. Because I know what goes on. I know what our farmers have to do to get their farms to generate a profit. As far as the milk prices, again, Washington sticks its nose in it, and supposedly one size fits all. We should be shipping more of our powdered product overseas. We shouldn't be allowing the price of cheese to determine what the price of milk is. We should be allowing the farmers to make their profit, but not have to dig into that profit to have that milk transported. And again, we just need to get the government out of it, let private enterprise do what it does best, and we're going to find our farmers will continue to hand their farms down from one generation to the next and be profitable.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Well, our next question comes from Laura Jansen of the Williamsport Sun-Gazette, and it will first be answered by Mr. Marino. Laura?
The American Society of Civil Engineers projects the U.S. will face a $1.4 trillion funding gap for its infrastructure by 2025. How would you fund and prioritize infrastructure projects?
Well, first of all, we wouldn't have wasted, as I said earlier, $1 trillion on shovel-ready jobs. But what we need to do is, when you say prioritize, we need to create jobs so we can generate the money so we can fix our highways. For the last 50 years, states and the federal government have left our roads and our bridges deteriorate. And we are stuck with this now. Our children are going to be stuck with it. And the only answer to this is not raising taxes, not coming up with fancy schemes or gimmicks for a stimulus. It goes back to creating jobs, bringing industry back into the country, bringing manufacturing back here, getting federal government out of our lives. As I said, lower the corporate tax. We're the highest in the world. CEOs come in to see me on a regular basis and say, we've got to get the tax down. I said, I know. I think it should be 15%. The average is between 8 and 22% around the world. But I say to the CEOs, you're going to lose the loopholes and the tax exemptions. They say, we don't care. Put us on a level playing field. What all of this boils down to is the government getting the heck out of our lives and let private industry do what it does best and give an incentive for manufacturing to move back into this country where we will have high-paying jobs. That's what will take care of our bridges and other things.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Molesevich.
The congressman likes to talk about bringing coal back and bringing jobs back. I don't know from where he's referring to. For instance, coal is not coming back as an electrical fuel for generation. Coal production peaked in 1940 during World War II. There will always be a need for coal, and coal is important in Pennsylvania. And I will know that very well because I've seen the downside of coal in Pennsylvania, where I grew up. The coal industry needs new markets. We need to work with the private sector in developing new markets through trade, fair trade, effective trade. And also we have to really look at, do we need more highways than what we have, and should we not be maintaining what we already have? We need to look at various other ways of raising revenue. It's just like a business, income and expenses. Bringing jobs back from a mythical place is not going to work, because the reason we have less manufacturing jobs in today's global economy is because of technology. We can produce more cars, more steel with less people because we're doing it smarter with better technology. And so we need to look at new ways of creating jobs and generating jobs. And as someone who's in business, I can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Molesevich. We'll move on to the next question. This will be from Jennifer Wakeman of Sunbury Broadcasting. And Mr. Molesevich will get first crack at this question.
Mr. Molesevich, you have worked as an environmental consultant for many years. Representative Marino, you have said you are against excessive government regulation. 2 weeks ago, or thereabouts, we had a 55,000-gallon gasoline spill from a gasoline pipeline into Loyalsock Creek. How would you balance protecting the environment, which I think we can all agree is important, without impeding on business development that can lead to economic growth?
The role of government should be to regulate those who cannot, will not, and should not regulate themselves. If the pipeline industry, the fracking industry, any kind of industry can regulate themselves and use the best technology, the best information to extract fuels, we wouldn't need regulations. However, a lot of times we do. When the Marcellus industry started, most of the fracking companies came from Oklahoma and Texas. It's a little flat there. It's a little dry there. And there was a learning curve that they had to learn, which ended up in some expensive spills and leaks and incidents. Even our own DEP had some learning curve to catch up. With regard to pipelines, there's more pipelines going in. We need to have a strict knowledge base of where these pipelines are. And there's a program called PA1 called DIG that tracks all of these pipelines so that when we work out in the field in construction sites, we don't accidentally dig into these pipelines or other kind of infrastructure. They should be installed correctly with the best available technology and with the best oversight possible to eliminate these types of accidents. It was a very unfortunate accident, and it came from a very unusual weather event that I believe is related to climate change.
Well, thank you, Mr. Molesevich. Mr. Marino.
No kidding. We should use the best technology out there. But you know something, that spill that you were talking about, it was taken care of, and was taken care of properly, because we do have rules and regulations in place to deal with that. And companies have to be responsible. Companies have to help pay, if not the entire amount, through whether it's insurance or whether it's profits, to clean up a mess. But this wasn't caused by someone laying the pipe improperly. This wasn't caused by someone making a mistake. It was caused by the storms that we had. But the key to this whole thing is it was dealt with in the appropriate manner. The locals came right out, the local individuals that watch these things, the state and the federal, were there. But we don't need the regulation that my opponent says we need. We don't need the regulation to put companies out of business who do this, run gas lines, run oil lines. We need to work with them. And it talks about we can't bring the coal industry back and bring our industry back from where? From China, from Japan. We're going to end up this year with an $800 billion deficit because we buy more and bring into this country than we sell and send out of this country.
Thank you, Mr. Marino.
Can I have a response to that?
Yes,
Briefly?
certainly.
With regard to pipelines going in, this new pipeline that's going to be replaced will now be 20 feet deeper. than what it should have been because it was too shallow, which is why it was exposed during the erosion of the stream banks near the bridge during that flooding event. And also, we need to stop reducing carbon dioxide emissions and other emissions to prevent these types of weather events from happening.
Thank you, Mr. Molesevich. All right, we have less than 20 minutes to go in this debate, and the next question comes from Laura Jansen, the Williamsport Sun-Gazette, and the first one to address that is Mr. Marino.
North Korea could soon be capable of targeting America with nuclear weapons. What can the U.S. do to protect Americans and keep us safe from this threat?
Well, the most important thing we can do is get a leader in the White House. We don't want someone in the White House who high fives and bows to other leaders. We need someone who looks them in the eyeball and says, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. We've seen what happened with this administration, with the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. We've seen the line in the sand drawn back and back and back. We're not responding when they fly past our ships in their jets. We're not responding. This administration didn't even pay any attention to Crimea and Ukraine. I'm vice president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I go overseas several times a year and talk to the other NATO countries, the generals, and set policy. The rest of the world is laughing at us. They're saying, where's the leadership? Where's the United States? How come we aren't responding to things? About the best thing this administration thinks it's the best thing it did was reach this scheme with Iran. And that's the first thing that a Republican president has to do away with. This scheme of Iran where we give them $150 billion, #1 funder of terrorists in the world. And the excuse is, well, that was their money from years ago. So we need someone who's going to tell it like it is, call it like it is, not worried about being politically correct, and make sure that if you come at us, we're going to come at you with both fists. Certainly diplomacy is a route to go, but you know what we need? I'm a Reagan guy. Peace through strength. We need to build our military at the lowest levels ever.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Molesevich.
Well, there's sometimes tough talk doesn't work. And if we're talking about a new leader in the White House, I would much rather have someone who is a little bit more emotionally stable, has experience, and has a good record with regard to where we are going to go into the future. #2, we need to work with our allies. And we don't insult our allies. We need to continue to work with NATO and other pacts that we have. And with regard to the Middle East and other danger areas, achieving energy independence will put less reliance on our imports of oil there, therefore reducing the cash flow of money going to terrorist states. It's pretty simple. For years we were talking about energy independence, and I think we need to use our ability to get the most out of the energy we have in this country and go towards a transition to renewable energy and fuel. And the Financial Times, Bloomberg, and others have recently reported that the amount of installed capacity for electrical generation across the world is now greater than coal. That's why coal's not coming back, because it's getting beat in the marketplace, Tom. It's getting beat in the marketplace by smart technology, solar systems, wind systems. There will always be a need for coal, but not what Tom thinks.
I just want to point out that the question was about North Korea, and somehow it devolved into the Middle East and our dependence on foreign oil. So I will give each of you 30 seconds more if you'd like to speak specifically about North Korea and what we can do. Mr. Marino.
We have to make sure that NATO is moved into the 21st century. NATO is not a pact. It's a treaty. We have an Article 5 in there that says if one NATO member out of the 29 members, now new, there's a new member, gets attacked, we come to their aid. But what we need to do is have NATO address issues concerning terrorism. We have to get the rest of the world to put our allies that look to us for guidance to put much heavier sanctions on North Korea and other countries like that.
Mr. Molesevich, North Korea?
Well, it's related to other countries and nuclear proliferation. The Union of Concerned Scientists has what they call the doomsday clock, and it's always just a few minutes away from midnight. We need to continue to reduce all nuclear weapons across the world. That reduces the possibility of their use anywhere. And getting back to presidents, and this is where we're going, we need to select someone who has more stability in making those decisions.
All right,
Okay,
let's move on.
Can I respond to that, please? He can't be talking about Hillary Clinton when he says a president with stability, someone who's under investigation for the second time by the FBI, someone who said to the FBI 42 times, I don't recall or I don't remember. And you know what that tells me as a prosecutor? Either there's something mentally wrong, or what they're doing is making sure that they don't lie, so their lawyer tells them, just say you don't recall or you don't remember. I happen to think it's both.
I have to offer you a response to that if you'd like.
When we're talking stability, I'll take Hillary Clinton any day.
All right, let's move on. Question from Dr. Stokes Brown of Bucknell University.
Thank you.
And this will first go to Mr. Molesevich.
Thank you. Polls show that most Americans think race relations in the country are the worst they've been in decades. Race is a big issue in the presidential campaign and has implications for the district. Like the rest of the country, is diversifying. How might you, as a representative of all people in the district, address this issue and help bridge the divide?
In going through this campaign, one of the things I enjoyed most was visiting downtown areas and meeting with people. And in the district of the 10th Congressional District, most of my opportunity to meet the most diverse people has been in Williamsport, a little bit in Lewisburg. And I welcome diversity. I welcome diversity racially, religiously, and with regard to LGBT people. That's the first step, is I'm not afraid when someone's different. Actually, I'm intrigued. I want to learn from someone who's different. And I welcome that, and I engage that, and I think we get the best and most out of ourselves, our country, when we are all working together with this diverse country that we have, because I think that's what makes us stronger, and that's what makes us better.
Thank you, Mr. Molesevich. Mr. Marino.
Well, what I've personally done is, I've been a big brother, and my first little brother was of African-American descent. When I was a prosecutor, I brought in the first and promoted the first African-American in my DA's office. I hired a second African-American. When I was U.S. Attorney, I promoted in my office for the Middle District of Pennsylvania the first African-American to manage in my office. And I think that that's what we don't look at. I don't look at color. I don't look at someone's ethnic background. I don't want someone looking at my ethnic background. And so if we each step up and treat each other with respect, make sure the laws are enforced equally, and I don't know if you were going in the direction of the police, but let the police do what they're supposed to do. I've prosecuted cops that were bad cops, but we have an administration, we have a president that has caused more dissension, more racial dissension in this country than in 40 years. He's making comments about cases, he doesn't even know what the evidence is. He's making comments, you know, there goes I. But you know what we should be doing? We want to talk about protecting and giving people an equal opportunity. This administration should start in Chicago, the president's own state, Illinois, where the murders are off the Richter scale. Hundreds of killings. They're up over 200 than what were last year at this time.
Oh, Mr. Molesevich.
I see no point in rehashing an administration that's going to be over in a few months. That's why I think we need to look to the future and rather than dwelling and criticizing the past. The future is where we are all headed, and that's what we need to do for our children with regard to any issue.
Thank you. Well, we have time for another question. Jennifer Wakeman of Sunbury Broadcasting will be making the next question, and this will go first to Mr. Marino.
Believe it or not, I've actually found something that I think you both agree on. You've both stated that you are against trade deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Yeah. How can we create new markets for American goods without these kinds of deals?
That's not as difficult as you make it sound. We need people in the government, particularly the president and the Secretary of State and those that are negotiating these deals, to make sure that the United States is on a level playing field. We just get into deals because we want to say we're into trade deals. Look what NAFTA has done for us. It cost us over 750,000 jobs. The TPP, the TTIP that's coming out, this is going to take jobs away from the American people. So we need tough negotiators to say to China, to say to Japan, to say to other countries, look, if you want to trade with us, you need us more than we need you. And that gets back to my premise of us bringing industry back into this country, manufacturing back into this country by getting rid of regulations. We simply should not continue to get into a trade agreement that's going to take jobs away. And we've seen it again and again in the agreements that this and other administrations have gotten into, both Republican and Democrat.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Mr. Molesevich.
We are a good exporter. We are a good manufacturing. I always have to laugh when, someone's going to make America great again. We are great. Pennsylvania exports about $30 billion of export goods. $30 billion. People want American products. They're good products, and we have organizations that are in place already to assist. Now, it's sometimes controversial, but one of them is the Export-Import Bank. That is an organization in Washington that assists new companies with the export of their products. And it's a very interesting organization. And I think what they should be doing a little bit better in the Export-Import Bank, also called EXIM, is there's too much favor for the larger companies and less favor for the smaller companies. So we need to work with smaller individual companies. That's where my experience is better than my opponent. 30 years I've been in business. My business has been helping other businesses. Just yesterday, I had someone come into my office to thank me and to ask me for some additional advice because he was laid off by Anadarko Gas Company. He was a professional geologist. And rather than looking for a job, he's creating his own job and he's creating his own company with my advice.
Thank you, Mr. Molesevich. We're quickly running out of time. We have just time for one more question, and I reserve the right to ask one. This is a question on the debt, the national debt, nearing $20 trillion. So what can be done? Now, the Republicans, as part of the plan, would Republicans ever consider cutting military expenses?
No.
And would the Democrats ever consider making adjustments to entitlements such as Social Security, welfare, Medicare, and the like? Mr. Molesevich first.
Well, to look at any issue as complicated as this, we need to go back in history. Those who forget history are bound to repeat it. And we need to go back to Ronald Reagan. When the marginal and effective tax rate for corporations was about 80%. Mr. Reagan reduced that significantly and then had a massive buildup in the military spending. What happened? Debt. Annual deficits led to more debt. The Bush administration similarly inherited a surplus from the Clinton administration and went into cutting taxes again and increasing spending, and talk about wasteful spending, the Iraq War cost about $3 trillion. Now, obviously, the debt has gone up recently, but that was because we were in such a difficult and dangerous financial and market recession from 2008. If the president had more cooperation and less obstructionism in the House and the Senate, perhaps we would have done better. But everything that we improved, for instance, unemployment, 10%, 5% now. GDP is growing steadily and has actually increased this last quarter. Interest rates are still low. And the financial markets are stable because we have stable leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Molesevich. Mr. Marino.
Well, I find that ironic. My opponent says, now we look back. Just a moment ago, he said, we shouldn't look back, we should look forward. But Obama has under his administration, has increased the debt $10 trillion, more than all other presidents together. And talk about obstructionism. When the Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, They didn't touch any of the important issues that they were supposed to, that they blamed the Republicans for not touching. But we did now. The Republicans, when we took over the House in the 2011 from the 2010 election, but still there was a Democrat-controlled Senate and the Democrat in the White House, the House passed over, we Republicans, with bipartisan support, passed over 400 pieces of legislation and sent it over to the Senate. And Harry Reid, the Democrat, the leader of the Senate, would not let any of that go to the floor for a vote. And you know why? Because Obama told him, I want to run for a second term. I don't want to be known as the veto president. So Harry, I want you to stop that. And that's part of some of the pieces of legislation that I have dropped and will continue to drop. Term limits, 12 years and you're out. No leader can stop a piece of legislation from going to the floor for a vote if it makes it out of committee, and one subject at a time. And so this administration, $10 trillion.
Thank you, Congressman. Well, we're come to the final statements, the closing statements. You have 2 minutes, and the first person to give us the closing statement is Mr. Molesevich.
Thank you for watching and listening tonight. We have a contrast tonight. We have a 6-year incumbent from Washington, an insider whose new best friend now is a billionaire, and I'm the new guy. I want to bring my 30 years of business experience of helping other industries and businesses throughout Pennsylvania. I can do that. I have been doing that. You can take a path with me to the future where, first of all, we need to reform campaign finance. My opponent has accepted over $500,000 in political action committee money just this election. $50,000 to $100,000 from pharmaceutical companies. Most disturbingly, just recently in the Washington Post and the Guardian, there has been news related to whether or not Mr. Marino has influenced lacking enforcement from the Drug Enforcement Agency. We need to know that and establish that tonight. Are the drug laws that are supposed to be in place keeping opioids and 165,000 deaths in the last 20 years, are we getting stronger on enforcement or less? Is this another example of less regulation? So my path to the future focuses on climate change. I'm disappointed that none of the other presidential debates and any other bring up climate change. Climate change is our path to the future because if we have a sound energy policy with renewable energy that can create jobs, reduce emissions, that's how we create jobs. It helps our sustainable agriculture and our tourism and our industry in Pennsylvania. So we can lead the world's economy with increased energy efficiency. We can raise the economic standards of working families with simple and fair economic programs. And tax policies incentives, not for the top richest 1%. I can do a better job, that you deserve better, and I am ready to work for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Marino.
My opponent fails to tell you that he was a council member and a mayor. He raised property taxes in Lewisburg 33%. You want somebody that's going to raise your property taxes? Because he's been in business, he knows better. My wife has a small business. I ran a multi-million-dollar business when I worked my way up into management. He talks about I made $500,000 this election cycle. I don't know. He doesn't know how to read an FEC report. And you know who most of my contributors are? People from right inside my district. That's who. Over half of my contributions are from hardworking taxpayers that live in this district. I work for you. You are my boss. No one buys me. No one tells me what to do. When I go to Washington, I'm watching your back and fighting. I've been there 6 years. I've promised 12 years, and all of us should be out at that time. I'm a leader. I make the tough decisions. I've been making them all my life, whether it's industry or whether it's a law enforcement officer. My opponent, the first thing that he will do is if he were get elected, he would vote for Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker of the House. That's a disaster in and of itself. He says that Obama's great, that Clinton's great, that Obamacare's great. Obamacare's great? You haven't been anywhere in this district and talked to people about Obamacare. My opponent just simply is standing up here telling you that he's worried about climate change. We're $20 trillion in debt. 10 million people out of work or underemployed, and he's worried about climate change, terrorism in the country. You better face reality and see what's going on out there. I'm a no-nonsense guy. I tell it like it is, and you will always have access to me because I work for you. Please vote for me.
Thank you. Well, that concludes this debate between the candidates for the 10th Congressional District seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Thanks to Mr. Molesevich and Mr. Marino for participating, and thanks to our panel. Tomorrow evening at 7, our series continues with a debate between the candidates for the 17th Congressional District, Congressman Matt Cartwright and Mr. Matt Connolly. It's Pennsylvania Decision 2016 on WVIA Public Media. Next Tuesday is Election Day, so make sure you go out and vote. I'm Larry Voitko. Thanks for watching, and good night.